Hello and welcome to our weekly look inside Syria. I'm Haitham Sibahi. Well, the Syrian opposition wrapped up its meetings in Istanbul after 8 long days of intense negotiations. They postponed electing a new leader but agreed on an expansion deal. As of now, Syria's opposition also says it will not take part in proposed international peace talks in Geneva next month. Well, joining us now to discuss this are our 3 guests. In London, Haitham Sibahi, a Syrian political activist. In Turkey, we have Colonel Abdel-hamid Zakaria, spokesman for the Free Syrian Army. And joining me here in the studio, we have Louay Safi, a senior member of the Syrian National Coalition. Welcome to all of you. Colonel Zakaria, if I could start with you. I want to ask you, first of all, about the meetings in Istanbul this week and what came out of them. Are you happy with the end result, and do you feel that the Free Syrian Army is better represented now?
In the name of Allah, the most gracious, most merciful, as a matter of fact, the Syrian revolution has been suffering not only from the response of the international community as much from the regime and the opposition themselves. This struggle between or among the opposition has a negative impact on the ground on the Free Syrian Army fighters. It is true that recently the recent meetings of the coalition has seen more representation of the Free Syrian Army with all its components. Yet I regret to say the glorious picture we had hoped has changed in the minds of all the Syrians. We had hoped that the coalition would be a true diplomatic and political umbrella, not only to help the Free Syrian Army achieve more victory on the ground and facilitate all possible means for assistance, but also work towards building a bright future for our citizens in Syria.
Louay, if I could turn to you on this, then clearly a lot of dissatisfaction from the spokesman for the Free Syrian Army that we just heard there. He's saying that your group still has a long way to go to get its act together.
Well, I did not come here to enter into a duel with the colonel. Basically, the opposition can be criticized actually as any other organization, particularly it's being put together under so very difficult situations. And I think there's a confusion between desire to shape it in a certain way and its own act. The difficulty really is that every time the opposition tries to put its house in order, there is a pressure to bring in new elements that sometimes bring us to the first square. So as I said, now at this point I think we have made good progress. The FSA, who I guess the colonel is speaking on his behalf, is now part of the coalition. And I think there would be a time for every person who participated in this to be called to question. But now we have one enemy. We have the regime. The regime is the one who is killing people, attacking cities, creating mess by making erroneous judgment and taking the wrong positions vis-à-vis the Syrian people.
Can you clarify the position of the SNC at the moment as far as what conditions will be attached to these talks in Geneva? We heard, the latest that we heard is that they will not, under any circumstances, deal with the Syrian government if Assad remains in power. Is that still the position right now?
Well, the position is that we are willing to enter negotiations that achieve transition to democracy, and that would mean that Assad will not be there. That's our position. There was a statement a couple of days ago made by the president, interim president of the coalition, asking for Hezbollah to get out of Syria and the international community to take an action to prevent the continuous attacks on the Syrian people by the combination forces of the regime and Hezbollah. And unless that is done, then we are not really interested in negotiation. You cannot negotiate while we have an external intervention and the world is silent about it.
Haitham Sibahi, the Syrian regime is not interested in negotiation at this point. Your response?
Well, first of all, the Syrian government has agreed to go to Geneva. They need to test the water. I mean, this is the problem we're facing, as you heard now. In the coalition or the FSA, there is quite a lot of different groups. And the Syrian government, actually, and the Syrian people who, like me, who they are pro the Syrian government, we are confused. These people, where their loyalty lies. I mean, some groups, their loyalty lies with Saudi Arabia or United States or Turkey. Some others with Turkey, some with Qatar. We don't know. We want an opposition where loyalty is to Syria and Syrian people. This is the problem where we're facing. This type of groups, they're changing alliance every day, and we don't know where we are with them. The Syrian government has been speaking in one voice, and of course we know it's a government at its best and can negotiate and can talk. But as the President Bashar Assad said, if we want to talk with what you call it, the slaves of the government, no, we will talk with those governments who control this type of alliance or this coalition. I mean, every time they meet to come out with some decisions, they end up with the problems and more division, and they call on the people in Syria to resort to arms and keep fighting. None of their families or children, the SNC, in Syria, they don't care about the Syrian people. We care about who is in Syria. We want this crisis to end politically. As John Kerry himself said, we wanted to end politically and start political process. And everything will be agreed in Geneva or anywhere else will be put to the referendum of the Syrian people, and that's what exactly the Syrian wants, because they want to see what these people present on the Syrian ground, who is their supporters. Nobody knows the quantity of their supporters. All what we see is conferences here and there and arguments. And last week it was, I mean, any one of them should be ashamed. They were attacking to each other. They were taking words from the French ambassador, which is also worse. The American ambassadors, what he said to them. There is videos about this. If these people could stand in front of French ambassador and American ambassador, all right, and they be talking to them like this, I mean, how would they lead the country?
I want to turn back to Colonel Zakaria then, because I know you want to respond to what you've just heard there, but I also want to ask you as well about the current situation in the border town of El Qusair and the reports that we're getting from there. It appears that the government has the upper hand there with reports of an ongoing siege, but then we've also been getting these reports of more rebel fighters moving in to the area. What can you tell us about that?
I would like to begin saying to the guest Louay Safi, who is with you in the studio, that today when we speak openly and candidly, it is the first step towards building Syria, the future, where we aspire that all will live equal, coexist without fearing the other. The regime has been oppressing the people for decades. We wish to radically change the way of life of the Syrians. When Mr. Haitham said that the Syrian regime has agreed to join the Geneva Conference, this is not true. He himself that we will put all the matters to the Syrian people. The question is, why was not the Syrian people put in the picture when he was inducted as a lawful president? Within a few minutes, the Syrian constitution was amended and modified to bring him to the seat of power, whereby we see all these tragic, catastrophic repercussions. He claims that there is only one voice in Syria, and to him I respond saying there is only one voice, the voice of of oppression, the voice of slaughter, the voice of oppression, and the voice of the president and his own imagination. When he says that we don't speak to them, but we speak to the parties and countries standing behind them, it is a twisted fact. If we sit with the representative of the regime, we are simply negotiating with Russia and Iran, simply for the reason that we are certain that the regime has no word or will. Speaking of Al-Qusayr, there are many military details which I cannot disclose. However, I can say that our situation on the ground is good. We are aware that the regime is deploying more troops and hardware to the Al-Qusayr area. We have our own military intelligence, we have our own facts, but we cannot disclose the number of fighters or the amount of military hardware and gear, and we are deployed on the routes of supply from Hezbollah to the regime, or the routes through which the new waves of Free Syrian Army fighters are coming. However, I can also say that the humanitarian condition in Al-Qusayr is very deteriorating. It is very catastrophic. How can the international community remain silent in the face of all these tragedies? The international community is raising false excuses so as not to prevent military, so as not to provide us with military assistance. What about the humanitarian relief aid? The international community can provide humanitarian aid to the Syrian people in Al-Qusayr. The international community claims there are jihadi fighters or terrorist groups, whatever they name it, in Al-Qusayr. We raised the question here.
All right.
Who brought the condition that worse? And the other question to ask, what the international community provided to prevent the formation of these jihadi brigades? If the international community is willing to fight terrorism, it should start by Iran and Hezbollah. Why Hezbollah has not been listed on the list of terrorist organizations? Why Hezbollah hasn't been punished? Today, the Syrian revolution will topple not only the regime, but will also topple the head of terrorism, Iran.
All right, Colonel. All right, Louay Safi, I want to bring up a criticism that I'm sure you've heard already. The criticism is that your group is still disconnected to the struggle on the ground in Syria, and all of this, the perception of all of this lack of unity within your group is feeding into that. What assurances can you give that all of those issues have been resolved?
Well, let us say, there is more bickering within the opposition that I would like to see myself and anybody else within the Syrian community. But again, this is an opposition that experiencing for the first time the responsibility of organizing itself. It has made a great progress. Now there's only one decision as far as the opposition is concerned. That is the decision of the coalition. And the confusion of your guest from London has to do from the fact he never experienced democracy in its full-fledged meaning within the Syrian community. Syrians can disagree today within the opposition, but ultimately they vote and they have one position in terms of what to do with taking away this brutal regime. And for referendum, I mean, he wanted referendum about the transfer of power to a popular government. Well, this referendum is currently being taken through the blood of the Syrians. You have 5 million people who have been put either made refugees or displaced persons. 5 million, that's almost half of the Syrian population. Isn't this a referendum? They are willing to take to sacrifice their lives and their properties to make sure that this dictatorship will end. So are we now being, is there a bit of waste of time in trying to come together in unity? Yes, but I think if you look at the trajectory of the opposition, we have grown gradually to become more organized opposition, both on the level of the political organization or the political wing of the revolution and in terms of the military wing. And I can tell you, in the next phase, things will develop much further. There's a resolve, there's a desire to get freedom, and the Syrians will not accept this dictatorship, particularly after it has become, after the bloodshed that has taken place over the last 2 years.
I want to thank all three of our guests, Haitham Sibahi, Colonel Abdel-hamid Zakaria, and Louay Safi. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you for joining us. Remember, Al Jazeera has extensive coverage of what's going on in Syria, not just on this program, but with our news programs and online at aljazeera.com. For now, from me, Haitham Sibahi, thanks for watching Inside Syria. Bye for now.